Right. I hope that everyone now who wants to attend this session is here. As we are a little bit tight on time, I'm going to get going straight away. First of all, to say welcome. This is the session on public policy and governance. My name's Andrew Thompson. I'm an emeritus professor of public policy and citizenship in politics and international relations here in the University of Edinburgh. I was asked just to say a little bit about my background, so I'll give you a quick run through. First of all, I worked in 4 universities: UMIST, Manchester, Cardiff and Edinburgh. I worked as a researcher in local government, and I also worked in a voluntary body coordinating research across 28 statutory, what were called community health councils across Greater London. My main research interests are in citizenship and public policy, especially in relation to health services, around quality improvement, democratic innovations such as citizens' juries, and participatory and deliberative democracy. I also work on European public administration, specifically the European Commission and the European Council. I've taught methodology throughout my career, in particular social statistics, and increasingly mixed methods. I think that's probably enough about me. And I thought we could perhaps start almost straight away with the presentations. Let me just give you a little bit of background. Each presentation will last 15 minutes. It's quite tight, but I'm sure we can hear a lot in 15 minutes. And after the final presentation, we'll have a question and answer session with all the presenters. So if you've got a question for one of our presenters, you can put this in the QA box, which you should be able to see on your screen. And obviously, we'll only have 15 minutes for Q&A, so we won't probably get through all the questions. I doubt we will. But we will ask the speakers to answer your questions orally and get through as many questions as we can. Please make it clear if you want everyone to answer or just one of the speakers to answer. If you don't have a time for your question to be answered, you can carry on the conversation in the public policy and governance chat room, where the speakers will be available to discuss it further. And you can also continue the discussion on the Chevening Scholars 2020 Facebook group. So I hope that's clear. Meanwhile, let me start by inviting our first speaker. I know it's a little bit early, but it gives us a little bit more time for Q&A perhaps at the end. So the first person we have to talk to us is Mildred Samboy Hernandez, who's from the Dominican Republic, working in an MSc in International Social and Public Policy with a focus on development at the LSE. And the title of her talk is Data, Power and Policymaking. Can we rethink data for development and leaving no one behind? So Mildred, if you're ready, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I'm more than thrilled and happy to be here, an honor. Right now it's 5 a.m. in my country. I'm currently at home in the Dominican Republic, in the middle of the Caribbean, next to Haiti. We are this small island development state, and I know that I will have the opportunity to continue talking about my country if there is any other question related to it. So thank you very much, Chevening. I hope that this conversation can be a starting point of some ideas that I'm going to bring to the table, because this is not a definite conversation related to data. It's just the beginning of a conversation that I have been thinking about in all my course, through all my course related to the importance of analyzing data, and moreover analyzing the narrative and the power discourses behind data, and why it is important to consider these discourses in order to deliver more appropriate or more responsible public policies around. So I will be sharing some slides. I really hope that I can have the time to, to complete and to continue with those 15 minutes. You can see my slides right now. Yes, Andrew. Yes. No.
Yes,
No.
yeah, I can see your slides.
Okay, so here's the conversation about data power and policy making, rethinking data for development and leaving no one behind. So the first thing that I want to ask many of you that are watching right now is how many times we have seen in social media, in policy making spaces and conversations related to the importance of considering data as one of the main considerations for our public policies processes, such as, for example, how are statistics under supply and underused, for example, and the importance of if we have enough data or not. But the conversation sometimes stays in the quantity of having the data or not, or which is exactly the importance of datafying, as it might be, the social, no? So in that sense, I would like to continue the conversation related to three main aspects: the data, but the social construct of what means data, and the symbolic power and the importance of data neutrality or not, which are the power relations behind this narrative of data colonialism, or data seen as a symbolic power of what is rephrased, or which is the meaning behind of that data, and that conversation that is related to data and the global north and global south. What means global north and global south, and why we need to question how development has been shaped, how development has been established by this conversation, and how it is impacting the policy circle and the cycle of public policies, and at the end, how it will impact people's participation into different narratives related, for example, for Human Development Index, context, multidimensional poverty index, 2030 agenda processes, among others. In that sense, I want to start with some thoughts. Data, it's been defined as, as a raw material produced by abstracting the world into categories, measures, and other representational forms. But at the same time, how is that categorization somehow building blocks of information and knowledge that are created in our societies? And how this knowledge creation process at the same time represents a symbolic power of the capacity that might influence the actions of production, transmission of that symbolic power around public policy making. Also, there's another term here, that important term related to symbolic interactionism. How this data that is being constructed for policy making is also extrapolated into the implications of data collection and processing for policy making. And to last in that process is the power dynamics behind that narrative discourses of that symbolic power around data and its implication of policy making. It says data colonialism or inequalities. In that sense, there are two terms that are important to consider in that process, and these are some theories that I have been talking with one of my professors from LSE. His name is Nick Coldry, and he has been talking a lot about datafication and dataism. These two terms are more related to data in a technology perspective as big data or other types of data. But how can we bring these theories into development and also policy making process? Datafication seems as a phenomenon to quantify, to quantify the social, to quantify all the processes that we are doing, what we do, how we behave, what we are willing to do, everything that embraces societies, how it's being datafied. So in that process of transforming society into data, how it is also constructed by dataism, that is the discourse, the power discourse behind this process of datafication. So Datafication is more or less the fact of doing it, and dataism, it might be one of the discourses that justifies this fact of datafying the social and transforming everything through data. So maybe we can park into quantitative data, moreover in some of these related to survey data, administrative data, or published statistics, and the importance of the responsibility behind these processes of considering these types of data for policymaking processes, such as which is the degree of the researcher control over the content, the raw data, what it means, if it is a data that it's been already analyzed and produced. These are some of the considerations that we need to take in order to fulfill this kind of concepts. At the same time, societies are composed by diverse voices, right? Which represent the constant changes that will influence social constructs and discursive powers, and that will shape the impact definitions and concepts. In that sense, it is important to understand which is the development model recognized in our countries. I'm jumping from data to the development discourses, right? So, and how these development discourses are impacting the way that data is being measured, applied into policymaking. So how are these discourses somehow impacting all the models that we are trying to reflect into the policymaking process? So obviously the development discourses or theories are quite ambiguous and wide in order to respond to what exactly means development, right? So development is a term that is in continuous construction and definition because it's going to represent specifically the realities of a phenomenon into which is exactly the progress, the way, the growth that our societies are building into. In that sense, it is important to recognize the impact of many of theories that are related to that global north and south concepts of what means development and what exactly we are trying to understand and categorize as development in the north or in the south, what it means. In many theories and many positionalities, it is brought that sometimes development means more developed in some countries from the global north and less developed in the global south. Some of these analyses related to development are going to be introduced or related into the phenomenon of quantifying also, right? So how it's being tabulated and analyzed the way that we understand development. Quijano, Aníbal Quijano is one of the conceptual positionalities related to decolonizing these terms. He has applied the way in which sometimes Eurocentric knowledge systems and codification of racial and social dissemination are the ones delivering or trying to define what means development. But at the same time, there are other concepts more in the way of analyzing how these terms of development and definitions can reproduce coloniality of power in many of these occasions and positionalities related to public policies. So it's also a way to produce social order in these definitions of development. So another term that comes with these analyses is data colonialism. This process of data colonialism is being analyzed by predatory extractive practices of historical colonialism with the abstract quantification methods of computing. Also, it's a way in which in many occasions, it's been a process of mining for data and other immaterial forms that are part of this policymaking process, in which is exactly the positionality of many international organizations and theories and how they're being applied in many countries that are considered not necessarily completely developed, but how they're being integrated into the development definition. In that sense, and trying to getting to the point, is that social policy entails the study of the social relations necessary for human well-being and systems by which well-being may be promoted. So the policy process sometimes, right, is a form of social action, both intended and actual, as inevitably incomplete in terms of its maps. It can also be multiple dimensions within any field of activity. And also it can be a process, a discourse, a political decision. There are many positionalities on how we can define policy and the importance in this process. In a more linear model of the policy process, there are some questions related to how we have to describe a problem in the policy process making, to select the desired objective, to identify the target of the objective, to determine the pathway to reach that objective, designing, implementing, and
joining there.
In all this process of the policy process, data is one of the important materials that are being implemented in the process. So what happens is, if many of the data discourses that we are utilizing are the ones related to which is the developed part, which is not necessarily that developed part, and how it is integrated into development theories, it can also impact the way we create policy process. So there's an important part of who controls the data that we are using in the policy making process, and which is the discourses of power that are being used behind that construction of that data, and also the ethics of using that data to understand the policy process making. In that sense, these data collection exercises developed through, for example, national surveys and different mechanisms might also be tailoring the relation among governments and the people. In that sense, sometimes people are seen as agents, interpassive agents, not necessarily interactive agents. So the participation of people in the policymaking process, when the majority of the data that is being utilized is completely related to quantitative data, for example, survey data, and these types of gathering, collecting information, it might be an important part on how it will be somehow impacting policymaking process, and not necessarily responding to the necessities in the field that are being trying to attack or are being trying to develop better. So it might be a way to replicate this symbolic power by how the data has been built and constructed and shaped. In that sense, I just wanted to quickly some examples in this what I'm trying to mention with these concepts. Human Development Index around the world has been one of the theories quite recognized, in which there are some specific indicators related to healthy life, knowledge, and decent standard of living. These three specific considerations around the Human Development Index has been one of the ways in which many of our public policies are being shaped in many of our countries, right? So there have been measurement tools considering different data from surveys, from many other actions, in which it somehow try to showcase how developed or not might be a country in the ways they are considering this perspective of education, health, and the standard of living. But what happens is that in many occasions, these measurement tools are not necessarily reflecting the entirety relations and realities in the field of many of these countries. Another way to consider this is how, for example, the multidimensional poverty index is another example of how measurement has been established as how can I say, as a package to be considered for many countries to measure development, to measure the ways many of the public policies are being implemented by different indicators. And for this, I'm going to put an example of the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic, measuring the Human Development Index, has been ranked as a country with a middle-high development index consideration in the ranking process. But what happens is that this is only representing the economic growth of the country, but this economic growth is not necessarily reflecting the human development that is occurring in the country, in a way that how this development economic growth is being transformed into other ways of development, such as, for example, security, living standards related to, for example, gender, and how this is reflected into a local level. So in many occasions, these development tools are using this type of data, are mechanisms that are represent which is the reality of a country. I just want to portray quickly, why is this important, for example, for countries such as the Dominican Republic? The official assistance, development assistance internationally is being responding to countries financially, considering the way it has been developed. If it is a middle income country, so for example, such as the Dominican Republic, many of the funds that comes, for example, for cooperation are the ones responding many of the necessities in the fields, are responding many of the necessities of which are the development actions that needs to be taken. What happens is that when a country gets a middle income country consideration or a high standard of development, sometimes the way it is responding, for example, for their crisis. Thank you for the advice of the minutes that are left. But I just wanted to bring quickly, what happens in these occasions is that the cooperation support related to financing, once a country has been somehow graduated into a middle income country, the way these measurements, international measurements, are being established in development are gonna be impacting negatively the way it is responding to these necessities in the fields. Because the domestic financing that needs to be taken in consideration are not necessarily responding to the actions that need to be for this support in our national budgets. So in that sense, I wanted to showcase how this phenomenon is being reproduced in Latin America and the Caribbean region, in which the official development assistance has been every year has been getting under percentage of how it has been responding to development in our countries. So these kind of scenarios are also reflected in the 2030 agenda process, in which there are many indicators and goals that are being established as one of the theories related to development, and how the countries will have or not the capacity to measure this data, and how these data are also or not responding to the necessities in the field. So I wanted an example of an SDG data lab, but we don't have the time. So I'm gonna go directly to some of the conclusions of the presentation. So it is important to understand how data are ontologically defined, and delimited is not a neutral technical process, but a normative, political, and ethical one, and how it has been integrated into development discourses of power and analysis, interpretation, and action. Some of the considerations also is that it is important to understand the levels in which we need to deconstruct these theories, development theories, and how important it is in the application of data usage for public policy making. It is important to keep the conversation as people that are working in development, how important it is to understand the approaches of each country related to data, power, and policy making is not always responding to the social realities in the fields. And it is important as policymakers, or whichever is our role, to understand how we're using this data to produce or not the policymaking process that is correct, how it is important to decolonize these discourses of power. And it is important to understand how data somehow can be responding to interests that are not necessarily the ones of how the countries are gonna be measuring development in the field. So I just wanted to bring this wide perspective of development, and I know this is just the starting point of a conversation that is an entire universe of what it is supposed to be a development discourse process. And what else? Let me see. I'm more than happy to share these thoughts. I know that it has been a lot, but I just wanted to bring them to the conversation because this is a process of, continuous work. Is not something that is already finished. So I will be more than happy to continue the conversation around this. Thank you very much. And sorry for taking a bit more of my time.
It's okay. It was fascinating. I could have listened to you all morning. It's actually chimes with a lot of the work which I've done in the past and currently working on with something called the Poverty Commission in Edinburgh. Very interesting questions around what kind of data, how are data constructed, because they don't simply lie around waiting to be collected, and how we might incorporate lived experiences and participatory practices into data. So that's fascinating, and I would love to talk to you more about that, but given the time, we obviously need to move on. People got any questions that they want Mildred or others to answer? Don't forget there is a Q&A box, and I'll try and ask as many as I can later, given the time. Let me now move to our second speaker, who is Roissa Darko from Ghana, studying the MSc in International Development at the University of Manchester, my old alma mater. And whose work is on urban entrepreneurialism and the failure of housing public policies to shelter homeless people in Ghana. And I'm sure this has got a lot of messages for us here in the UK. So we're looking forward to what you have to say, Roissa.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's nice to meet you. Yes, University of Manchester here. So not to take too much time, I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Yep. Okay.
So good morning, everyone. So honestly, I know that today most people are here they expect to see a presentation, to listen to the dynamics and the facts of homelessness. I'm sure a couple of people are wondering, what is urban entrepreneurialism? And probably wondering what the end of this whole presentation would be. Probably a repetition of what we've always heard about homelessness. But today, I want to present you with the reality of what homelessness means, the undeniable reality of why homelessness still persists today in Ghana and across the globe. The truth of why 100,000 people still remain homeless on every given night on the streets of Accra. Now, this is Charles. Calling this Charles and his big move. Unfortunately, this picture is not, this is not Charles because of private reasons, but this picture is a picture I took 2 years ago during an outreach that I usually do with my organization to reach out to homeless people. Now, Charles is a victim of what I will be sharing today. He is a man that has resettled from one location to another due to the failure of the housing policies to provide a housing system that would protect the needs of homeless people and provide the basic requirements they need. Charles has, just a quick story on what this story is about. Charles has suffered from his shop being abolished by the government, which has left him to lose his source of income. And because of this, Charles has remained homeless. So just to give in the central ideas of what will be discussed today, we are going to look at the truth of homelessness, the reality behind the Ghanaian housing policy, urban entrepreneurialism, and the probable housing interventions that we can suggest to developing countries. Now, homelessness is definitely a global housing problem that devastates both developing and developed worlds, where it doesn't matter regardless of the socioeconomic prosperity or advancement to development a country has, this issue still persists in both worlds. The mission to stop homelessness doesn't mean that people wouldn't lose their homes, but it ensures a solution that is that needs to be given by us, you, me, to make sure that housing interventions are provided to save or curb or manage homelessness. The concept of homelessness in Ghana over the years basically has been due to sequences of rural poverty, which has developed out of urbanization, where people usually move from their villages in the rural city to the urban city because they all desire the quality of life that me and you, we both so want, or we both so have today. In the wider development concept, homelessness is related to primarily related to the shortages of housing, which is usually accompanied by housing unaffordability. So, for example, in countries like the US, usually there is low housing supply because there's a tight restriction of land to help to be able to achieve the aim of conserving the environment. In the US, in the UK, homelessness usually happens within the youth. And so they are unable to afford the expensive housing system. Now, despite these underlying causes of homelessness, we all acknowledge that the developing world is able to provide, or is able to, has the resources or capability to provide housing interventions in the form of shelter homes and subsidiaries to help these, or to help manage the situation of homelessness. But the question is, can we justify this for the developing countries? Countries like South Africa, where people are homeless because of unemployment, or countries like Nigeria, which has similar cases to Ghana with rural-urban migration, where they do not have the socioeconomic capabilities to handle the situation. Evidently, the classification or category that defines homelessness in the developed world is not enough to analyze the magnitude or the features of homelessness in developing countries due to the socio-economic disparity. Now, I'm going to move on to this story about Fifi. Yeah, that's a lovely picture of me there with Fifi, who I met during a time that we went to an outreach. Usually we have these outreaches either at dawn or at night, and he was stranded sleeping under a bridge. So I was able to approach him, and I gave him what we were sharing, and I was able to help him talk to me about why he was here. He basically explained to me that his mom was dying, and his mom was in a very critical condition where he needed money urgently. So he decided to move to the capital, which is Accra, in search of a better job. But unfortunately, he didn't find any. And that was Fifi crying. I remember so well that day, the tears in his eyes when I gave him a small amount of money, and then I gave him food and basic home necessities. Now, this is a classic example of people becoming homeless due to rural-urban migration and a poor housing system that has a low supply to understand or cater for the needs of homeless people. Now, in many cases, in cases of Fifis, where people are unable to find shelter or unable to, afford shelter, it doesn't mean that these homeless people don't usually work. Usually they do have mini jobs in that is called petty trading, where they are either engaged with headquartership or they are either engaged with, street hawking. However, the money they gain is not enough to help them acquire shelter. So they just prefer to sleep on the streets where they can save as much as they can and send back home. Now, this has led to people gathering materials like roofing sheets, broken wood to make shelter just for the night. And this is what we classify as slum dwellings. So this is, I'm sorry, this might be something that people would not like to see, viewers' discretion. But this is an area in Accra called Sodom and Gomorrah, where people live, they live in this situation. They breathe, they wake up, they do everything in this situation. And I know for a fact that it is not a situation that people would be in. So I think that the most important thing that we need to see here is that the Ghanaian housing policies need to rise up. And that is what I'll be discussing in the next session. I'll be talking about two policies, that is the direct state provision and then the PPPs. Now, I recognize the Ghanaian housing policies has invested in providing affordable homes for low-income groups, which usually includes floating populations like homeless people. And it began with the direct states provision, where the state was involved in providing housing that would favor low-income groups, using policies targeted to inclusively involve the homeless people, or to inclusively involve low-income groups in the housing market. And they did this by providing housing subsidies, upgrading these slum dwellings for it to become a better condition for people to live in. However, the government was unable to keep up because of the huge housing deficit it created and the huge budgetary it needed to sustain the project. So they had no choice but to solicit or move into privatization, where they incorporated the real estate development sector to come in to sort of have some sort of a public-private partnership together with them, so that they can ensure that housing is made available, and they can keep up with the budgetary that comes in. Now, the policies involved the real estates went ahead to improve the market conditions, which boosted economic growth at the end of the day. But what it seemed to do was, because building materials were imported, which meant that housing would be more expensive, it didn't necessarily favor the low-income groups, but rather it favored the high and middle income groups. The goal of the government was to ensure that Accra became a modern business-friendly city. So by inviting these real estate developers and growing the economic system, foreign investments or foreign countries or foreign companies got attracted by the development that was going on in the city and decided to come in. And this brings me to my next concept of urban entrepreneurialism, where the government usually simply means that urban entrepreneurialism is when government officials prioritize the private sector to flourish, rather than investing in public services that would benefit other people. Now, the next slide is basically, this is a classic case of PPPs. And this is a classic case of where I'm going to give you an example of a project which was in collaboration with the Korean government. And during this time, that project is called the STX. And during this time, it was supposed to provide about 300,000 housing units within 5 years to do something about the situation. But however, due to several contestations, this was unsuccessful. Now, every average Ghanaian earns, an average of approximately 2,000 cedis. That's what, maybe £200 approximately. And housing in Ghana, renting an apartment in Ghana, it's about 2,800 cedis. So, and usually people need to pay that 2,200 and 2,800 cedis monthly on a 2-year advance condition agreement. So usually they have to, pay 2,800 cedis times 2 years before they can rent an apartment. How on earth is a homeless person or a low-income group who earns below 2,000 cedis able to afford that? Now, this is where the situation comes in. So, looking at this point of view, and with my limited time left, looking at this point of view, I want to delve into a case of South Africa that handles, that has been able to handle homelessness to a certain degree, even though it is a developing country. Now, over the past—
Can I interrupt, Roissa? We're running out of time, so can you just wind up possibly?
Yes, this is the last part.
Okay.
Yes. So over the past 3 decades, South Africa has been able to, provide shelter homes and subsidiary incomes, subsidiary housing to individuals who have not been able to generate income. So for people who own from 0 to 2,000, 0 to 200 rand, they are given free housing. Now, this is the ideology, this is the thinking, this is the action that developing countries need to think around. They need to think around this. What can we do? What can we do as Ghanaians? What can we do as a developing country to adopt this ideology to help curb the situation? Now, I want to leave you with 3 takeaways. Think about the reality of homelessness, the housing policies, and housing interventions. As leaders, I believe that we should think about not only empathy, but we should think about the action involved. What are you going to do about the situation? What are you going to do to make sure that as you go to bed tonight, 100,000 Ghanaians still sleep outside without shelter, without food, without the basic necessities to live a decent life? What are you going to do about it as a leader? Now, this is just a summary, this is just an underlining research, but I want us to all be inclusively involved in social development and look at the situation on a high level view, besides what we always hear about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roissa. That was a heartfelt plea, which obviously a major issue in many countries is the issue of homelessness, and looking at how specific policies work in different countries. So I'm hoping that people will engage with you, Roissa, about this very important issue. Given the time, I'm going to have to move on quickly, I'm afraid. We have 2 more speakers, but they're going to share the last 15 minutes. This is Reem Noureddin and Mohamad Yaman Sammani, who are both from Syria. Reem is doing an MA in Education, Gender and International Development at UCL, and Mohamad is doing an MSc in Management and Implementation of Development Projects, also at the University of Manchester. So welcome to you both, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say about shaping the world through education.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having us here. It's such a great opportunity to be able to present together about the subject we're both so interested in. So yes, my name is Reem Noureddin. I'm from Syria, and I'm doing Education, Gender and International Development at UCL. And we have 15 minutes to share with you what we came to the UK to study, what is our passion, mutual passion, and what we hope for the future of Syria and of all of the children of the world.
Hello, good morning. This is Mohamad Yaman Sammani. I'm pursuing just like Master and Implementation Development Project at the University of Manchester. And I'm also from Aleppo. I'm also from Syria, and the same city that Reem came from. Although both me and Reem have never met before, but we both have the same passion about education. And we are so thrilled to present to you how we can shape the world throughout education. All right. I know that we have some limited time, so I don't want to take this opportunity or take this time to explain to you, the right to education and why education is important and why we should take care of our education and all the child right that we have known before, especially as future leader, let's say. But I would like to emphasize about the importance of education in the Sustainable Development Goals and why we should be aiming for quality education, especially in the last Sustainable Development Goals and the previous Millennium one. But I have a question for you before moving to the next slide. What do you think is the total number of out-of-school children in the world? Do you think it's like 10 million? Do you think it's 15 million? What do you think is the total number of the out of school children. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think about it, and then I will be moving to the next slide to give you the shocking number about that. So according to UNESCO report published in 2019, there's around 258 million children out of school. This is adolescents, youth, primary school, pre-primary school, etc. If we want to convert this number to like normal figures, you know, because 200, someone would say 258 is not that big number, but this is 80% of the United States population. This is more than quadruple the UK population. This is nearly 1/5 of the global population in that age in the globe, and we think this is a lot. This map summarize or give a glance about where are the most out of school children allocated, and unfortunately we can see that most of them are in Africa, and a couple of them are in conflict affected countries, just like Syria, the one that we are going to talk about, Jordan or Yemen, and all surrounding countries where they are hosting refugees, just like Turkey and others. So before going to our research, me and Reem, we're gonna talk about why children are why children are being out of school. We're gonna just give a small glance about that before moving to, we'd like to summarize a couple of the reasons, and then we'll be moving to talk about our research. So attack on education. By the way, these reasons are taken from a report for an organization called Now, but also they base their information on UNICEF, UNDP, UNFPA, UNHCR data. So in 2019, more than 14,000 attacks on education, more than 10,000 of them were directly on schools, and this was affected in 34 countries over the 5 years period. The conflict is still one of the major reasons why children are out of school. 1 in 5 children live in the countries affected by conflict. Many of them are denied all of their rights, especially education, as a result of this conflict. 48.5 million children are missing school because of wars and conflict, just like the one that's happening now in my country, Syria. Funding for education. I mean, both me and Reem were working in projects that are supported by, let's say, international community, and we still every day try to fight for fundings. Please, we want more money to implement education projects. Children are leaving school, children are out of school, children are missing an important aspect of their life. So far, only 2% of the international aid are being provided for education. This is a little, like so little than the thing that we need actually on the field. Gender, the famous reason, girls always denied the right of education. 130 million girls between the age of 6 and 17 are out of school. 50 million girls of primary school age will never enter classroom so far. I mean, when I was reading these numbers, me and Reem, we were amazed. I mean, we are in the 20th century and we still have this a huge number of girls are being denied of school because of their gender. The menstrual cycle poverty. One of the reasons I was surprised when I heard about it a couple of years ago, that 1 in 10 girls in Africa, they miss their school because of their period each year. Girls dropping out from school after their period start. We should be able to provide support for these girls to come back to school. And the list goes on and on. I don't want to spend all of the time talking to you about what other reasons children are being out of school, like child labor, child marriage, climate change. All of these reasons that you find in front of you, they have a lot of figures and number and percentage that they are really shocking. And this is what we really want to make a change. This is what we really want to shape the world throughout education after we implement such a project that supports, let's say, children to come back to school. Over to Reem, that she's going to talk to you about the crisis in Syria, and also she will start talk about her research.
Thank you, Yaman. Hello again, everyone. Well, unfortunately, a decade of conflict has created the largest humanitarian crisis in our modern history. And now, 1 in 3 Syrian children have grown up to know nothing but crisis. How did that affect education? Well, prior to the conflict, Syrian youth were considered among the most educated in the region. For example, enrollment rates were as high as 95%. However, the ongoing conflict has reserved years of educational progress. Now, over 2 million Syrian children are outside of school, 1.6 are at the risk of dropping out for multiple reasons, And a third of the country's school buildings are either destroyed, damaged, or used for non-educational purposes. When it comes to my research, I chose to study this master's degree because I wanted to understand how gender dynamics affect education in conflict-affected countries like my country, Syria. My research is focused on understanding the root causes of the current educational crisis to be able to tackle the challenges and build back better, because we all aim to provide quality education for all children, regardless of their age, race, gender, or socioeconomic backgrounds. One of the most interesting things I learned in my master's degree is that schools don't always play a positive role when it comes to providing children with equal opportunities. For example, going to school in rural areas is much different than going to school in urban areas. Educational resources allocated to schools vary largely, which means that the quality of education that children are provided with is not the same. This affects children's skills and knowledge and the ability to gain future employment. Another example is the language of instruction. In Syria, Arabic is the only official language of instruction in schools, which means that minority groups are not able to speak their native language in schools. They are also not well represented in school textbooks. This has created a sense of tension and frustration among the youth and led to future conflicts. When it comes to gender roles in the Syrian community also affect children's ability to access quality education and remain in schools. For example, males are considered as the main breadwinners of the family, regardless of their age or their ability to work. Therefore, boys had to drop out of school and engage in child labor to provide for their families due to poverty and hard economic situations. Boys were also forcibly recruited as fighters by armed groups, which took away their childhood and their right to education, to health, and to just enjoy normal childhood like most other children. Girls, on the other hand, drop out of school for different reasons related to gender-based violence. Different reasons include security reasons, like facing harassment in and on their way to school, family obligations, like providing care for their siblings, for their children, taking care of the home. They also face child marriage, and unfortunately, there's still a sense of underestimation of education's importance to girls, to their futures, and to their well-being.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Reem. And you can see that most of the reasons that Reem mentioned are already included in our introduction about why children are leaving school. So the interest about my research, that the fact that both me and Reem are working in two different areas in the country, because we have the country is separated now, and both of us are delivering the same type of project. My research took another level of understanding why children are out of school and how we can work to bring back children to school. The reason behind that is most of the international actors try to implement emergency project, where the time we think that we need development project. Emergency projects are short-time projects. They focus on very limited resources. They don't take care of the long term of children education development process. But whereas the development project should aim to have a better understanding of what the children should have or achieve from the first grade to the fourth grade, that we can provide a package of support for children, for teachers inside of school, rather than providing a support for X school in X area and Y school in another area. Development project will help us to provide a comprehensive response in such a crisis. Children will be able to access organized activities, well-structured education that based on unified curriculum all over the country. As Reem mentioned, we have different minorities, we have different language spoken in the country. We need to make sure that everyone receives the same education. Teacher also on the other way can receive throughout providing development project, can receive a nationwide capacity building trainings for them that tailors to their need. There's still a conflict between the humanitarian project or the emergency project and the development project, and that's what we are trying to do now. We want to make these two organizations, the one who are doing projects in emergency and the one who are doing project in development, talk to each other, support each other, rather than working against each other. Why we should drink the bill? Because if we didn't do anything, we won't be able. If we didn't intervene to support the back to school to children, we won't be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And in a decade, more than 825 million children will be out of school if we would lack the basic skills they need for job in the future. There is a famous term called knowledge generation. That we all aiming to while we are designing such kind of implementation, whether it's for development or for emergency. The main idea is, just like I mentioned before, we want to bring back this children to education, whatever it costs us to do. Over to Reem.
Thank you. I understand we only have 1 minute, so I just want to share with you that rebuilding Syria as a country starts at the community level. People need to believe that the key to positive change lies within them. And as young leaders of social change, we need to better understand how to foster community-driven change and how to address identity-based resistance. I wish that Syria will soon find peace. And I think we all believe that one of the best ways to support future peace is through education, through providing everyone with equitable opportunities. At the end, I want to leave you with examples of previous Cheveners who were able to support and implement educational interventions and initiatives in their countries after finishing their degree in the UK. They supported, some of them, like in Nigeria, they started an organization for supporting education in rural areas. And the other example of Afghanistan, another Chevener was able to start a library commuting around the areas and supporting children with books and knowledge they normally wouldn't have access to. The last example I want to share with you is a very famous picture saying that violence ends when education begins. And I hope now we will go back and think, how can we support education in our countries? How can we provide everyone with equitable resources? And how can we ensure that all children enjoy their right to education and to grow up in a safe environment? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right, thank you very much, Reem and Mohamad Yaman, for your interesting presentations. I think we would like to hear a lot more about what you're doing, but we obviously don't have time just now. I just want to remind people that they can ask questions, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the next few minutes. Let me start with a question which came up about the use of measurements, really, and multidimensional indices in measuring development, and really in relation to what has been called the Global South, but really questioning whether they should work to establish new indices that work in their context rather than using these generic ones which have been developed. So if speakers would like to answer that, I guess it's really focused on Mildred's contribution, but others can answer as well if they wish.
Yeah, so as I understood, it's related to which actions can be taken in that sense. That's the question, more or less, in the sense of these international measurements tools.
I think it's probably about which measures they should be developing, which might be more locally appropriate.
Okay, so I didn't have the time to develop it, but in the multidimensional poverty index example of the Dominican Republic, what it was done in that sense, I just wanted to bring that as a positive example, is that even though there were different indicators and categories that were prioritized by the Oxford Institute and Sabine Al-Khair, that is one of the people researching the MPI, what happens in the Dominican Republic is that SUBEN, that is the Unique System Beneficiaries institution, took the Multidimensional Poverty Index as an example, as a baseline, but we built as a country our specific Multidimensional Poverty Index Dominican Republic brand, in which 2 other categories were introduced related to digital gap and also related to the employment and livelihood. these two indicators were not considered as one of the ways to measure multidimensional poverty, and they were prioritized by the country. So in that sense, that might be one of the examples on how maybe these tools can be considered. The other part, and I wanted to bring that quickly, is how the national statistics systems can develop their own capacities and granularities and differences that are more endemic, that are more related to the origins of the country. For example, I want to put the race condition. It's something that is being contested in our country and not necessarily taken in consideration in our data measurement processes for policy making. So when we're talking about intersectionality, for example, in our policy making process, as our national development strategy, we don't have that as an indicator, the race discrimination, for example. So I just wanted to bring this because our national development strategy as a country has been built by international considerations. But when it comes to intersectionality, the race is not there in our policymaking process as one of the indicators to take in consideration and gather data about that kind of discrimination. So imagine as a country that we are struggling to face the realities of our origins and our mixture of who we are, and we are not necessarily measuring that. We are not considering that as a data, as a data that is important for our policymaking process. So what happens is that at the end, our policymaking is not going to be responding to the realities of discrimination of vulnerable groups and the realities that are occurring in the field. So I just wanted to put that example of what it's been doing as a positive example with the MPI, but in the other hand, we have been considering these international measurement tools, but in the example of race, they're not there. We don't have that as an indicator and it's not as a data consideration. So there you can see how the North theory part of development has been integrated in our policy making, but it's not responding to our global South realities as a country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any of the others want to comment on that question? If you do, please do so. If not, I can move on to another question, which I thought might cut across some of your areas quite well, which is looking to which extent, or what extent, gender could be an important element to development, knowing the cultural and traditional conception in some countries is still working. What will be the strategies to follow gender equality to foster development? So who would like to begin on that question?
Reem, you are muted.
Sorry. What I was saying, I can give a brief explanation. One of the most used methods now to ensure that gender dynamics are integrated in the policy making is gender mainstreaming, meaning that gender should be in every and all aspects of planning, implementing, and evaluating our programs, and also making everyone aware of how gender roles affect our abilities to access resources, to be fully occupied with our rights and be truly empowered.
Thank you, Reem. Mohamad, do you want to say
Can I add to the gender part? Yeah, yes, please. And I remember when I first started working with this type of development project or emergency project at like 6 years ago, we were not giving a lot of attention to the gender aspect. But in the previous 3 or 4 years, let's say, donors and all of the NGOs start put the gender as a main component of their project. We are not allowed to proceed with any project proposal if we don't have a certain gender aspect that we need to take into consideration. Otherwise, this project won't be funded, won't be implemented. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No.
I can come quickly to say something about gender. Quickly say something. It's really important, as Reem and Mohamad mentioned, in the case of the Dominican Republic, gender, mainstreaming gender, for example, in sexual and reproductive rights politics is essential. In the case of the Dominican Republic, we're currently facing a debate related to introducing 3 exceptions to our criminal code, in which right now we are one of the 5 countries in the world that women can't have access to any kind of abortion. So I wanted to bring this out because it's not only, it is the power, the control over the body, and how gender, it is important to mainstream beyond only being measured, for example, but the discourses of power behind the control of the body of the women, for example, or other genders are not necessarily. So I just wanted to bring that quickly and the importance it is because we are currently facing that debate and we're having this situation right now in the Dominican Republic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mildred. Perhaps I could move on to a question which Roissa might like to talk about in connection with public-private partnerships in solving the housing crisis in Ghana. How does this intervention go around the budgetary constraints of the country and the profit maximizing interests of the private sector to avail affordable housing to these vulnerable people?
So basically, I spoke about how the private partnership, the public-private partnership has injected foreign capital into the economic system because due to this, foreign investors are attracted to the system. So then we recently had Twitter headquarter. Twitter came to establish its headquarters in Ghana, despite other countries or other available developing countries that could do that. And because of this, it has attracted, people in. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that why can't we strengthen these PPPs? The initial essence of why these PPPs partnership or policies were established was to provide affordable housing. But unfortunately, it isn't doing that because the average Ghanaian cannot afford it. The average Ghanaian, the low income group categorize majority of the population. There's about 46% of people who form part of the low income group, including homeless people. So why don't we strategize? Why don't we redirect our focus? Now that at least we've been able to benefit or have some advantages over these PPPs, why don't we redirect it to ensure that the main purpose of why it was established be fulfilled? We can leverage on this this economic boost, this favorable benefits that we enjoy now. We can leverage on that, strengthen it, reposition ourselves, and invest in either housing subsidiaries like South Africa does now, or we can provide shelter homes for emergency cases to homeless people who need it. I mean, South Africa is providing shelter for homeless people for as low as £1 a night. £1, that's close to nothing. Why can't developing countries do that? Why can't Ghanaians do that?
Okay, I think that's a strong response to that question. Can I move on to another question, which is more focused, I think, on Reem and Mohamad Yaman's presentations. Could you please provide the extent and severity of conflict that Syria is going through? I suspect that's going to require too much of a response, but is it sustainable to focus on development while there is ongoing conflict? Should we not focus on eliminating the root cause, which is the conflict itself?
Exactly. If you allow me, Reem, to go for this. This is actually this is the main reason I wanted to go for this research, because, and this is also will be followed up by my thesis, my dissertation here. I do agree with you that we should focus on the root causes of the conflict, but this is we should do this in the beginning of the crisis, not after 11 years of the Syrian crisis. Now, after 11 years of the Syrian crisis, we should change the mentality of development aid and let the people start support themselves. We should be able to give them the tools so they can support themselves, to develop themselves, rather than keep the aiding program being provided to them. I was implementing one of the development project that was funded by the Home Office here in the UK, and we saw the result, because this project was implemented on the nationwide. It was not only implemented to cover 1 or 2 schools, just like the emergency project are implementing. A previous assessment were conducted for all the children in that area before implementing the project and after implementing that. And you can see the shocking result, the improvement in the student quality, or the quality of education that was provided for students in the primary school. And this is where we are basing our result, that we should let development talk to the emergency. We should let them walk side by side. We should let them implement project together. We understand that development have certain certain risks, let's say, because it's not stable, but we should be able to put this on the table and start talk about it between both development and emergency. Thank you so much.
I just want to add one thing quickly. I think one of the most issues that people are now talking about in the development is to build back better, meaning when we are planning for future rebuilding the infrastructure, we're focusing that what previously led to the ongoing conflict won't be happening again. And we're mainly talking about the institutional violence or the structured violence within the institutions, within the better schools, or the organizations or companies. So focusing on development is not only focusing about the current programs, but also about how those programs will challenge the previous root causes, while emergency is just focused on today, on ending the problem for a very limited time, while development should be focused on what caused this and how can we avoid it in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that the argument is that development itself may help to get people out of conflict. So you don't do one and then the other. They actually have to go in parallel, in a sense. Well, thank you very much to all our speakers. I could spend a lot of time talking to you because it's so interesting what you're all doing. For those who are watching, just remind you, if we didn't, I think we asked most of the questions. We had a few thanks for the speakers. But if you want to carry on the conversation, you can do through the Chevening Class of 2020 Facebook group or the designated chat box. You can also use the public social media. The hashtag is #Chevening Conference 21. And there is now going to be a networking session for the next half hour and then a short lunch break. So if you'd like to join Annie in the main room at 1300, 1 p.m. UK time, for the beginning of the afternoon session, it'll include a panel session on leadership and 3 more topics on development, technology, and human rights and conflict. So thank you very much indeed. Really appreciated your contributions. Bye-bye.